Welcome back. Today's episode is called The Villain's Slot Report, because the loony left doesn't actually want law. They want discretion. Their discretion. They don't want accountability. They want immunity with a megaphone. And they think screaming fascism louder turns ignorance into virtue. It doesn't. It just makes you loud and wrong. Here's how adults handle this. We separate what's claimed from what's proven, then we talk about what it means. So grab your coffee, tighten your standards, and let's get to work.
Every time I tried to stand, they pushed me down. Now I've had enough, can't take it all around. It's time to be strong, time to be clear. No more being used, it's time to repair. No more Mr. Nice Guy, I'm through. Time to stand up, let the world see. No more being weak, it's time to break. I'm done with the pain, I'll take my place.
It's Tuesday, January 20th at 7:59 p.m., and you're listening to Shawn Thinking Out Loud. And tonight, we're going to do something that apparently qualifies as extremism in modern media culture. We're going to remember what just happened. And I'm watching this clip, Megyn Kelly's breakdown, I think, and it's a masterclass in left-wing amnesia theater. Don Lemon, on camera, insists he didn't know what was going on. Very sincere, very solemn, very rehearsed. And then, unfortunately for him, the footage cuts to Don Lemon explaining exactly what was going on. Not guessing, not confused, commentating in real time. This isn't a contradiction by accident. This is a lie collapsing under its own weight. And suddenly Don Lemon is scared. You can hear it, you can see it. The tone changes, the posture shifts, the voice gets careful, because the rules changed. Back in the old days, you could just say, "That's not what I meant," and the media choir would harmonize behind you until the audience doubted their own eyesight. But now the clip plays again and again and again, and that's when Don Lemon reaches for the rebrand. "I'm an independent journalist now." No, you're not. You're a podcaster with a brand identity crisis. And there's nothing wrong with podcasting, unless you're using it as a witness protection program for your past statements and deeds. You don't become independent by losing your network contract. You become independent by stopping the script. This is where the loony left really loses the plot. They still think words outrank video. They still think labels override evidence. They still think calling yourself something makes it true. That's not journalism. That's self-identification as a career strategy. Let me give you a Brazil life contrast, because living outside the Western bubble ruins you for this nonsense. Down here, when something breaks, people don't hold a press conference about their feelings. Power goes out, they light a candle. Water line breaks, they fix it or work around it. Bureaucrat shrugs, they shrug back and move on. I've watched Brazilian guys fix machinery with zip ties, swear words, and sure will, and still make it to work before sunrise. Meanwhile, back in the modern West, a grown man with a media pedigree collapses because his own footage betrayed him. This is fragility pretending to be sophistication. Brazil has corruption, Brazil has crime, Brazil has real problems, but it still produces adults. The loony left produces people who panic when accountability shows up without a trigger warning. And that's why Don Lemon's situation matters. Not because he's special, but because he's typical. He's afraid because he knows something the audience is only starting to learn. The media no longer controls the archive. They can't memory hole video. They can't bully screenshots. They can't cancel timestamps. And when someone keeps insisting over and over that they're an independent journalist, what they're really saying is, please stop calling me what I actually am. Independent from what, Don? Independent from CNN's payroll? Sure. Independent from the same narratives? Absolutely not. Independent from ego? Don't insult us. Here's the hard truth. The loony left can't process. You can survive being wrong. You can even survive being biased. What you can't survive anymore is being caught lying on camera. And then demanding the audience pretend it didn't happen. This is Shawn Thinking Out Loud. No filters, no amnesia, no rebrands. Just the tape and the truth. It's Tuesday, January 20th at 8:40 p.m. and you're listening to Shawn Thinking Out Loud. Today we're cutting past the bull. No filter, no apologies, because some of the stuff passing for common sense out there is about as stable as a three-legged table. Let's talk about intellectual fragility. You know, that thing where every strong idea gets handled like it's a Chinese vase in a porcelain shop. Some folks on the left have turned every disagreement into a crisis of existence, a real sensitivity panic that makes a British Tea Party look like a bar fight. Now, you've seen me share that video of the ICE agent being hit by a car. The argument from certain corners is that the agent threw himself into the vehicle, a claim that defies basic physics. I mean, really? A multi-thousand-pound machine doesn't need a volunteer to do the heavy lifting. I'm not here to cheer violence or celebrate harm. But when the response is to rewrite reality, turn impact into self-sacrifice, and then pretend they're the ones being oppressed, we've lost all anchor to fact. In Brazil, where I've lived and watched real-world challenges unfold, people have a degree of grit that's almost foreign to modern Western discourse. You don't survive cities where traffic ignores red lights, dogs claim their porch, and the power goes out just to remind you who's in charge without learning how to keep your head straight. Here's the lesson. Reality doesn't care how you feel about it. It doesn't pause for your emotions. If you can handle a day in Brazil without melting down, you can handle a morning online without declaring every disagreement illegal or traumatic. Mocking this isn't hatred, it's critique based on reality. If one side insists on victimhood for every scratch, they're inviting no demanding pushback. If you're tired of fragile logic dressed up as moral superiority, you're in the right place. We'll keep calling it like it is. No soft gloves, no polish, just real talk. It is Tuesday, January 20th at 8:42 p.m. and you're listening to Shawn Thinking Out Loud. All right, let's talk about the Clintons allegedly skipping a congressional subpoena and the adorable little fantasy some people still have that Washington is a place where consequences happen to the right last name. Here's what the reporting says. The House Oversight Committee Chair, James Comer, says Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton refused to appear for scheduled depositions after bipartisan subpoenas tied to a renewed Epstein-related inquiry, and the committee says it will move toward contempt proceedings. Now you asked, now what? I'll tell you what could happen, then I'll tell you what I think will happen. Spoiler, what I think will happen is absolutely nothing. First, what could happen? Congress has a few ways to enforce a subpoena, and none of them are the clean little Hollywood script people imagine. 1. Congress can vote to hold someone in contempt and refer it to the Department of Justice for prosecution under the federal contempt statute. That's the criminal contempt route people always yell about online. 2. Congress can sue in court to enforce the subpoena, meaning years of litigation, appeals, and procedural trench warfare until everyone forgets what decade it is. 3. There's inherent contempt, the old school theory where Congress can detain or fine someone itself. In modern practice, that's basically a museum piece. It exists in lore. It rarely exists in reality. So yes, in theory, contempt in theory, legal pressure in theory, a process. In practice, you're dealing with the political equivalent of a foam bat. Now, what I think will happen? Nothing. Not a little something, not a symbolic accountability, not a strongly worded letter. I mean, nothing. Because Washington's enforcement mechanism is not the rule of law, it's the rule of who. If your last name is Clinton or your friends' last names are Clinton adjacent, the system doesn't say how high when you jump. It says, would you like a trampoline? And that brings me to the question you asked the loony left, which is a fair question. And it's a question that makes people suddenly develop a religious devotion to process and norms and institutional integrity. Here it is. If the Clintons had dirt on Donald Trump and the Epstein list, why wouldn't they show up for that subpoena? I'll wait. See, this is where the modern Western political mind does gymnastics like it's auditioning for Cirque du Soleil. On one end, they'll tell you the Clintons are these omnipotent chess masters, blackmail files, secret lists, black channel control of the universe. On the other hand, when there's a subpoena and an opportunity to go under oath and clear the air, suddenly it's, oh well, actually, congressional subpoenas are just performance art, and there's no legitimate legislative purpose, and this is harassment, and they already cooperated, and it's beneath them, and the vibes are off. Translation, power doesn't answer questions. Power sends a lawyer. And before someone starts shrieking, "But Trump!" save it. This isn't a team sport. This is about a system that has trained a certain class of Americans to believe their side is made of angels and the other side is made of criminals, while their own angels somehow never show up to anything that involves oaths. Here's the part the loony left never wants to say out loud. If you actually had a smoking gun that could end your enemy forever, you don't avoid the subpoena. You weaponize the subpoena. You show up. You bring receipts. You do the political version of a public execution, unless you don't want discovery, unless you don't want follow-ups, unless you don't want to say anything under oath that can be tested, contradicted, cross-referenced, or used later. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's just how incentives work when lawyers are involved. Now let me do a quick Brazil life anecdote, because this matters. So I'm in Brazil, out on a street that looks like it was built by someone who said, "Level? Never heard of her." It's hot. It's humid. The air feels like a wet towel with ambition. And I'm watching people move. Not complain, not posture. Move. There's a guy hauling boxes like gravity is a polite suggestion. There's a woman balancing groceries, a kid in a conversation like she's got 4 arms and 0 patience for drama. There's a motorcycle weaving through traffic like a surgeon with a deadline. And nobody stops to announce their emotional truth to the universe. They're not fragile. They're not processing. They're not holding a seminar on lived experience because their latte foam was aggressive. They just handle it. Now, contrast that with modern Western fragility politics, where half the adults act like a subpoena is violence, a question is harm, and accountability is oppression. Brazilian grit is, we have problems, we solve them. Modern Western fragility is, we have feelings, you solve them. And that's why this Clinton subpoena story is the perfect little snapshot of the era. Because the loony left's idea of justice is not equal standards. It's, my people are too important to be questioned. Let's get back to the mechanics. The committee chair says contempt proceedings are coming. Fine, that's the procedural next step. But contempt referrals depend on follow-through, and follow-through depends on institutions that are willing to do their jobs when the target is politically connected. So yes, it's possible you see a vote, it's possible you see headlines, it's possible you see cable news theater, and then you'll see the great American tradition. We investigated ourselves and found we did nothing wrong. Now, for the loony left, one more time, slowly, so it sinks in. If the Clintons had dirt on Trump in the Epstein list, why not show up, go on the record, and end him? I'll wait, because the answer isn't complicated, it's just inconvenient. Here's what you're watching in plain English. A political class that treats subpoenas like optional RSVP cards, and a public that still pretends the system has equal enforcement, like we haven't watched decades of accountability turned into a press release and a book deal. So don't tell me about democracy. Don't tell me about institutions. Don't tell me about norms. Tell me why the people who sermonize about accountability the loudest are always the first ones to lawyer up and vanish when the questions get specific. That's today's segment, Subpoena Theater and the Sound of Nothing Happening. It is Wednesday, January 21st at 1:23 p.m., and you're listening to Shawn Thinking Out Loud. So I'm scrolling Yahoo News because apparently I enjoy emotional self-harm, and I see this headline bouncing around. Minnesota police chief claiming ICE agents are pulling people over, demanding paperwork, and in at least one alleged case, drawing guns on an off-duty cop. Not a TikTok cop, not a Halloween cop, an actual badge-carrying off-the-clock police officer. Which means, by today's standards, we are roughly 15 minutes away from the loony left declaring the Geneva Conventions have been violated because someone asked for an ID at a traffic stop. Now, before the comment section starts convulsing like a possum in a microwave, let's state the obvious. If federal agents are stopping U.S. citizens with no cause and escalating encounters with weapons, that's a problem. That's not tough enforcement, that's sloppy, stupid, and it's gasoline. Pure gasoline for the people who treat borders like a hate crime. And here's the key word, allegedly. Because even in the reporting, DHS is pushing back and saying they don't have records of some of these incidents and that they're not out there racially profiling people for sport. So we're not going to do what the left does, where the first accusation becomes holy scripture and anyone asking questions is a Nazi. We're going to do what adults do, separate what's claimed from what's proven and then talk about what it means. Here's what's being claimed by Brooklyn Park Police Chief Mark Bruley at a press conference on January 20th, 2026. Complaints of civil rights violations in the streets, people being stopped without cause, demanded to show paperwork, and that off-duty officers, described as people of color, were allegedly targeted too. In the story he relayed, an officer was boxed in, demanded paperwork, tried to record, had the phone knocked away, and saw guns drawn until she identified herself as a Brooklyn Park police officer, at which point the agents allegedly left without apology. If you're hearing that and thinking, okay, that sounds like a lawsuit waiting to happen, congratulations, you are medically alive. But here's the other half of the story. The half the loony left will accidentally drop on the floor like a toddler with broccoli. We have had years of this same political class, especially the activist left, treating ICE like a cartoon villain. They don't criticize policy, they do religious theater. They don't debate enforcement, they scream Gestapo and Nazis and then act shocked when regular people start viewing federal agents like occupying troops. And then, get this, they get upset when interactions turn tense. No, you don't get to light the match, pour the gasoline, and then blame the fire for being hot. Think about the incentive structure. The left has trained an entire population to believe that any immigration enforcement is inherently immoral, that enforcement itself is violence, that asking for identification is tyranny, that arresting people who shouldn't be here is basically the Nuremberg Trials. So the moment a federal agent does anything short of walking around in a cardigan offering hot cocoa and apologizing for existing, the left screams, see, Nazis! And the media is right there like a raccoon at a dumpster living its best life. Now, I'm going to say something that will make the loony left clench their pearls into a fine powder. Law enforcement sometimes asks for ID. That has been reality since the beginning of time. It's not a dictatorship because you got to ask who you are. It's called living in a society where criminals exist. But, big but, the power to stop and question has to be disciplined, lawful, and accountable, because the moment it's not, you create the exact propaganda the left prays for at night. If ICE is operating in a way that looks indiscriminate, whether it is or not, you lose the political middle, you lose cooperation, and you hand your opponents the greatest gift imaginable, a scary story with video. And in 2026, the electorate runs on vibes and clips, not policy papers, not legal nuance, clips. This is why optics matter. Not because we should be ruled by optics, but because we are. The public doesn't read footnotes. They read facial expressions. So here's what I want to know and what you should want to know before you swallow anyone's narrative whole. 1. What exactly was the legal basis for these stops, if they happened as described? 2. Who were the agents? What agency components? What operation? 3. Is there body cam, dash cam, surveillance? Anything besides secondhand retellings and chopped clips? 4. Why is DHS saying it has no record of incidents while multiple local chiefs are describing a pattern that disconnect matters? Because the fastest way to wreck public trust isn't enforcement. It's enforcement that looks like it's being made up as it goes along. And now let's roast the loony left properly. The loony left wants no borders, no deportations, no enforcement, and ideally no consequences unless the consequences are for you. They live in a reality where the only legitimate use of state power is punishing dissenters on social media and forcing kindergartners to memorize the latest ideological password. But if you deport an illegal alien, suddenly the state is violent, fascist, and genocidal. It's the same people who applauded defund the police and then call 911 because their DoorDash was late. Their worldview is basically the government is evil except when it's enforcing my morality. So yes, when they see ICE doing enforcement, their brains short circuit. Because it's the one time the machinery of government is not being used to pamper their fantasies. But again, if ICE is overreaching, the left will not criticize it responsibly. They will weaponize it. They will use it to shut down any conversation about border security, national sovereignty, or the basic concept of citizenship. They will take one bad encounter and attempt to repeal reality. And Republicans, God bless them, are often too polite to understand the game. They'll say, well, mistakes happen, and then act confused when the other side turns mistakes happen into the Fourth Reich has arrived. This is not a policy debate for them. This is a narrative war. So what's the sane position? Here it is. We need immigration enforcement. Every country on the earth enforces its borders, especially the ones the left romanticizes from their iPhones. Enforcement is a national security function. Local chiefs in Minnesota literally said enforcement is necessary, but how it's done matters. And if this Minnesota situation is as described, then ICE needs to tighten up operations immediately, because you do not win by spooking citizens, alienating local enforcement, and handing the opposition a movie trailer. You can remove bad actors without acting like a bad actor. And to the loony left, spare me the theatrical fainting couch routine. You spent years cheering chaos, defending illegal entry as compassion, and treating anyone who asked for enforcement like they were recruiting for Mordor. Now you're shocked that federal enforcement has friction. Please. If you want fewer tense encounters, stop pouring poison into the public mind. Stop telling people every badge is a swastika. Stop calling every ID check a civil rights apocalypse. Stop trying to obstruct enforcement and then crying when enforcement gets more force protective. And if you actually care about civil liberties, then focus on evidence, accountability, and clear standards, not your usual hobby of setting the country on fire and blaming the smoke on systemic something or other. The rule of law is not optional, but neither is the Constitution. If you can't enforce borders while respecting rights, we deserve the mess we get. And if the only thing you can contribute is ICE is the Gestapo, then your political analysis belongs where it started, in the comment section of an NPR Facebook post, next to someone screaming that sidewalks are white supremacy. It is Wednesday, January 21st at 1:35 p.m., and you're listening to Shawn Thinking Out Loud. Let me translate what you're watching in the streets right now. These protests against ICE have about as much to do with ICE as a vegan has to do with brisket. This is not about Manuel. It is not about Maria. It's not about compassion. It's not about rights. It's not about the Constitution. It's about one thing: power. The loony left is running a power recovery operation, and they're doing it the only way they know how, by lighting social matches and letting their brainwashed foot soldiers confuse moral virtue with public disorder. Because here's the truth: the media won't say out loud. Most of these people don't even know what ICE does on a Tuesday. They don't know what authority ICE has. They don't know what probable cause means. They couldn't define jurisdiction if it bit them in the face. But they do know how to chant. They do know how to make a city look ungovernable. They do know how to manufacture a crisis and then blame the crisis on Trump. So when you hear abolish ICE, what you're really hearing is abolish consequences. When you hear no one is illegal, what you're really hearing is no one is accountable. And when you see activists trying to stir panic, screaming Gestapo every time a law gets enforced, what you're seeing is a marketing campaign, not a moral movement. Now, I'm not pretending nothing has happened in Minnesota. There's been real tension there, real disputes between local officials and federal enforcement. And reporting says a large enforcement surge has sparked protests and legal fights. And yes, there have been shootings connected to this enforcement surge, which is exactly why everything gets volatile fast. But watch what the loony left does with it. They don't do facts, they do story time. They don't want accountability, they want images. They want the clip, the meme, the headline, the vibe. Because vibes win elections now. And they're trying to regain power in 3 moves. Move 1. Turn enforcement into terror. They paint every badge as a stormtrooper costume. They scream Nazi until the word becomes background noise, then they scream louder. Move 2. Turn every scuffle into a symbol. One confrontation becomes the regime. One allegation becomes systemic fascism. They take a messy situation and narrate it like a Netflix documentary with a villain voiceover. Move 3. Turn chaos into blame. They create instability and then point at the instability like, look what Trump did. It's arson followed by an insurance claim. And the saddest part is how easy it is to manipulate the crowd. You don't need policy. You don't need law. You don't even need a coherent argument. You just need a slogan with enough emotional sugar to rot the public brain. No human is illegal. Okay, cute. Now run that line through literally any other area of law. No driver is illegal. No tax evader is illegal. No trespasser is illegal. See how stupid it sounds when you apply it consistently? That's why they don't apply it consistently. Consistency is for grown-ups. They're selling a feeling. And here's where I'm going to be painfully clear because the loony left thrives on vagueness. I support enforcing immigration law. That is normal. That is what a sovereign country does. But I also support enforcement that is disciplined, legal, and above board, because if enforcement looks reckless, it becomes a recruitment poster for the very activists trying to burn the system down. The left isn't protesting because they suddenly discovered their love of due process. If they cared about due process, they would have cared when they were cheering censorship, cheering mob punishment, cheering career destruction, cheering guilty until proven inconvenient. No, they're protesting because this is how they climb back into the driver's seat, by making the country look scary, unstable, and out of control, and then insisting the solution is more of them. And their favorite trick is pretending they're defending the little guy, while they're actually defending the political machine that imports chaos and exports responsibility. They say they love immigrants, but they treat immigrants like props, like mascots, like emotional support humans. Because if the immigrant becomes an actual person who might have complicated opinions, who might hate crime, who might dislike open borders, who might want assimilation, that ruins the script. So it's not about Manuel, it's not about Maria, it's about Manuel and Maria as marketing. This is the loony left trying to regain power by weaponizing disorder. They want you exhausted. They want you demoralized. They want you to look at street chaos and say, fine, just make it stop, and then they hand you the solution they were selling the whole time. The only problem for them is this. Regular people are catching on. They watched cities get trashed and called it mostly peaceful. They watched criminals get excuses while victims got lectures. They watched the same people who scream democracy try to silence, shame, and punish anyone who disagreed. So now the left has to rebrand their old playbook. It's not riots, it's resistance. It's not obstruction, it's community defense. It's not lawlessness, it's speaking truth to power. Same chaos, new packaging. So what do you do with this? First, don't fall for the emotional blackmail. You can support lawful immigration and enforce borders. That's not cruelty, that's civilization. Second, demand competence from enforcement. If operations are messy, tighten them, because messy enforcement makes the left's propaganda easier to sell. Third, recognize the motive. This isn't about ICE, it's about power, it's about narrative, it's about making Trump look like a villain so the rescuer class can crawl back into office. They don't want reform, they want a reset button that puts them back in charge. And they'll happily burn a city block to get it. It is Sunday, January 25th at 1 p.m., and you're listening to Shawn Thinking Out Loud. All right, Minneapolis again. Federal officers, a shooting. The internet immediately lights itself on fire like a college dorm microwave at 2 a.m. And like clockwork, the loony left shows up to tell you this was ICE. ICE did it. ICE is murdering people. ICE is out of control. Except it wasn't ICE. The reporting identifies the shooter as U.S. Border Patrol agent, and DHS officials have been publicly defending the shooting as self-defense. Now, before the usual suspects start screaming, "You're defending murder!" let me say it slowly for the people in the back row who never did well with words. I am not saying the shooting was justified. I'm saying two things can be true at once. One, the shooter looks questionable based on the videos being discussed. Two, a grown adult choosing to get physical with federal officers while armed or even while potentially armed is a high IQ way to speed run a funeral or a felony. Let's talk about what's actually being reported because unlike Twitter, reality doesn't care about your vibes. The man who was killed has been identified in multiple reports as Alex Preddy, a U.S. citizen, and his family says he was an ICU nurse. Federal officials claim he approached with a handgun and that agents acted in self-defense. But video reviewed by major outlets have been described as contradicting key parts of that claim, showing him holding a phone at points while being pepper sprayed, tackled, and even shot on the ground. Some reporting also notes that agents may have recovered a firearm from him, but the videos do not clearly show him brandishing it before shots were fired. So yes, there's a serious question here about use of force in the official narrative. But here's where the loony left does what it always does. It takes a complicated, ugly event and turns it into a children's cartoon. Bad guy, good guy, roll credits. Fundraise, repeat. And the dumbest part is how quickly they get basic facts wrong while acting morally superior about it. They scream ICE even when the identified agency is Border Patrol. It's like watching someone lecture you about astrophysics while they're still eating the crayons. Now let's get to the part nobody wants to hear because it requires adulthood. If you are in a heated confrontation with federal officers and you choose to fight, or even choose to escalate, you are gambling with your life. And if you are carrying a firearm during that, you are multiplying the risk like you're trying to win a Darwin Award with honors. Again, I'm not claiming he deserved to die. That's childish. That's not how law or morality works. But I am saying this. If you end up charged and convicted of forcibly assaulting or resisting federal officers, you can be looking at serious federal time under 18 U.S.C. 111. And if you catch a felony conviction, congratulations. Federal law generally prohibits felons from possessing firearms under 18 U.S.C. 922G. So the fantasy scenario the left invents, he fights the feds, gets arrested, and then becomes a heroic symbol is not how it works in the real world. Real world scenario is you get arrested, you get charged, your bank account gets lit on fire, your life turns into court dates and attorneys, and if it goes badly, you become a prohibited person, meaning no guns for you, at least as a general federal matter. This is why I keep saying stop confusing bravery with stupidity. You want to protest? Fine, protest. You want to record? Great, record. You want to argue? Go for it. But the moment you decide to get physical with federal officers, you're entering a domain where the margin for error is basically zero. And here's the grotesque trick the narrative peddlers pull. They treat every dead body as a political coupon. They don't even wait for facts. They wait for a hashtag. They don't ask what actually happened. They ask, how do we use this? And if the facts don't fit, they do what they always do. They just change the facts. Now, to be fair, because unlike activists, I'm capable of fairness, the feds also need to stop issuing statements that don't match what the public can see. If you say he was a gunman and the video being circulated shows a man holding a phone and being shot after being tackled, people will naturally conclude you're lying. That doesn't mean the public is always right. It means you don't get to pretend optics and credibility don't matter. So here's what a sane society does. It investigates, it preserves evidence, it releases relevant video, it interviews witnesses, and it holds people accountable if wrongdoing occurred. Now, abolish all enforcement. Not federal agents are all Nazis. Not anyone shot by law enforcement is automatically a saint. And not the other side's fantasy either. If you get shot, you must have deserved it. Both of those are the politics of children. Let me give you some hard, grown-up rules. Rule 1. If you carry a firearm, your job is to avoid situations where you might be forced to use it. A gun is not a personality trait. It's a responsibility. Rule 2. Don't mix firearms and chaos. Protests are chaos. Crowds are chaos. Pepper spray is chaos. Shoving is chaos. If you choose to be armed in that environment, you'd better have discipline that 99% of people do not possess. Rule 3, don't reach, don't lunge, don't scuffle, don't I'm going to show them. That's how you get mistaken for a threat, especially in a split-second environment where everyone is adrenalized. Rule 4, if you want to fight the system, do it with a camera and a lawyer, not with your hands in a street confrontation. Now here's the punchline. The loony left claims to hate guns. But watch how fast they glorify a guy for confronting federal officers in a situation where a firearm was reportedly present or later recovered. They don't want gun safety. They want gun safety for other people. They don't want de-escalation. They want escalation that produces footage. They don't want justice. They want content. And the reason they're so eager to blame ICE, even when reports say Border Patrol, is because they don't care about the specific agency. They care about the villain slot. If it's not ICE, it's Border Patrol. If it's not Border Patrol, it's DHS goons. If it's not DHS, it's the regime. The labels are interchangeable because accuracy is optional in activist world. Meanwhile, adults are sitting here asking, who shot? What was perceived? What was actually happening? Was the person armed? Was the person threatening? What do the angles show? What do the witnesses say? What can be proven? And until you answer those questions, you don't have an argument, you have a tantrum. So yes, from what's been described and shown publicly, this incident deserves serious scrutiny. And also yes, anyone turning a street confrontation with federal officers into a physical struggle is playing Russian roulette with extra bullets. Those two truths do not cancel out each other. They are both true because reality is not your activist fan fiction. If you want reform, demand transparency and due process. If you want safety, stop encouraging people to step to armed authorities like it's a Marvel movie. And if you want to be taken seriously, stop blaming the wrong agency while claiming you're the only ones who care about the truth. Because right now, the only thing the loony left is reliably accurate about is how quickly it can be confidently wrong. It's Sunday, January 25th at 5:12 p.m. and you're listening to Shawn Thinking Out Loud. Let's talk about a particular species of internet wildlife, the one-up guy. You know him. You breathe oxygen, he's breathed it better. You got wet in the rain, he got wetter in more dangerous rain while rescuing an orphanage with one hand tied behind his back. And last night on Facebook, I ran into a prime specimen, Carol Sanders, also known as Karen Carroll, because he's got that "I want to speak to your manager" vocal fry baked into his soul. Here's what Carol served up with a straight face. At his high school, the swimming coach was a Navy SEAL. And this Navy SEAL said Carroll should have been in the Olympics if he had 2 good arms. Okay, sure. And then because lies love company, this Navy SEAL also used Carroll as a motorboat engine when he went fishing. Yes, you heard that correctly, Carroll, human outboard motor. Now, if you're thinking, that sounds familiar, congratulations. You have functioning cultural memory, because that story isn't just suspicious, it's basically the Karate Kid wearing a fake mustache. Let's connect the dots. Carroll tells me he got trained in karate by a 70-year-old World War II veteran. And that's exactly the kind of detail people borrow when they want their story to feel true, old, wise, military, disciplined, stoic, mystical. It's also the exact archetype of Mr. Miyagi, the mentor figure whose backstory explicitly includes World War II service. Now here's the part that matters. It's not that a World War II vet taught karate is impossible. It's that Carroll's version comes bundled with movie-grade, audience-tested, quirky mentor gimmicks. Because in The Karate Kid, Miyagi trains Daniel with chores and oddball tasks that secretly teach technique and balance. And there's even a famous boat balance lesson, Daniel standing on a rowboat bow while Miyagi lectures him about balance being the key. So when Carroll hands you Navy SEAL coach, Olympic destiny, one-arm tragedy, human motorboat fishing excursions, 70-year-old World War II karate master, what you're hearing is not biography. You're hearing a patchwork quilt of macho folklore and pop culture tropes. Now let me say something slowly for the people in the back of the comments section who think confidence equals credibility. The more a story sounds like a movie, the less it sounds like real life. Real life is boring in the details. Real life has names, dates, locations, documentation, witnesses, receipts. Real life doesn't rely on "trust me, bro" and a dramatic pause. And here's where Carroll made the tactical error. He took a person who actually has their life on public record, me, and tried to play fantasy league resume games. My military awards? Public. My books? Public. My music? Public. My work? Public. My classes? Public. I don't have to invent a legend, I can just live one. So when I pointed out that his story smelled like a screenplay, Carroll did what weak storytellers always do. He panicked. And because he can't defend the content, he attacked the label. Oh, you're self-published. Yes, and? Self-published is not a synonym for wrong. It's a synonym for I didn't ask permission. If Carroll thinks self-published is an argument, then he's confessing that he doesn't know how arguments work. Because if you want to critique a book like an adult, you do this. You cite a claim. You show the error. You provide evidence. You compare sources. You make a case. But Carroll can't do that. Because Carroll doesn't want truth. Carroll wants status. And status is the one thing you can't counterfeit when someone asks for receipts. So here's the rule. Write it down, Carroll, since you love dramatic lessons. If you lie once, you've told the audience you're willing to trade reality for advantage. And after that, everything you say gets treated like a used car salesman promising it just needs Freon. Maybe it's fine, but I'm not buying it without a mechanic and a warranty. Now, because I'm generous, I'm going to offer Carroll the simplest way out of this embarrassment. Carroll, if your stories are true, then produce basic details. What was the Navy SEAL's name? What years did he coach? What unit did he serve with and when? Who else can verify this? Where did he teach? Where did he fish? Where are the photos? The yearbook notes? The local paper mentions? Anything. Same for the World War II karate instructor. Name, where, when, lineage, students, photos, tournament records, dojo affiliation. Not because I'm mean, but because that's what real people have. Verifiable lives. And if you can't provide any of that, then stop acting like you're being persecuted. You're not being persecuted. You're being fact-checked. And that's the part the modern world can't handle, especially the loony left adjacent lived experience crowd who think feelings are evidence and identity is a credential. They don't want standards, they want applause. But the internet is shifting, and people are getting sick of performance. They're asking for proof. They're asking for specifics. They're asking for consistency. And Carol, poor squealing Carol, sounds like a rat in a trap because he finally met someone who doesn't clap for cosplay. So here's the message for the comment section, for the audience, and for every Carol Sanders who thinks they can bluff their way through adulthood. If you're telling the truth, you don't fear questions. If you're lying, you fear details. And the moment your life story starts sounding like the Karate Kid, the burden of proof is no longer on the listener. It's on you. Because credibility isn't a vibe. It's earned. And if Carol wants to keep playing Daniel-san, he better remember, in the real world, there's no soundtrack, no montage, no cutaway, just receipts or silence. It's Sunday, January 25th at 8:52 p.m., and you're listening to Shawn Thinking Out Loud. Tonight's segment is called The Moral Equivalence Meltdown. The loony left has one move. They take two events that sound similar. If you squint, they staple them together with a headline, and then they demand you feel the same way about both of them because thinking is hard and outrage is easy. Kyle Rittenhouse is just like this guy who got shot by Border Patrol. No, that's not analysis. That's a child's sticker book. So let's do what your favorite activists refuse to do: define terms, separate facts, apply logic. Yes, I know, shocking. Here's the core difference, and it's not complicated. One case went through full American legal process, charges, evidence, witnesses, cross-examination, and a verdict. The other case is the kind of fresh outrage situation where half the country is arguing from a 20-second clip, the other half is arguing from a press release, and the truth is being smothered by people who treat every tragedy like a campaign ad. Those are not the same category of thing. That's like comparing a finished autopsy report to a rumor overheard in a bar bathroom and calling them both medical science. Now, Kyle Rittenhouse, you can dislike the kid, you can hate the optics, you can even think it was reckless for him to be anywhere near that chaos. But you do not get to rewrite the legal outcome because it ruins your narrative. A jury heard it, a jury saw it, a jury judged it, not guilty. That's not white supremacy, that's not systemic whatever, that's 12 human beings applying a standard called self-defense. And here's the part that makes the loony left short circuit. Self-defense is not a right-wing idea, it's not a Republican loophole, it's not a talking point, it's a moral principle as old as civilization. If you are being attacked, you do not have to politely die to preserve someone else's feelings. And the left absolutely hates that principle because it interferes with their favorite fantasy, that only their side gets to use force and everyone else must submit, apologize, and surrender. Now let's talk about this Border Patrol comparison. What we have here, right now, is the left trying to issue a final verdict before the facts even finish putting their pants on. They want you to see a shooting involving federal officers and immediately chant the approved slogan, pick the approved villain, and pre-order the approved moral conclusion. Because the modern left doesn't do due process. They do vibes process. Here's the adult posture. If someone is shot by law enforcement or federal officers, you don't start by declaring sainthood or declaring justification. You start by asking, what happened? What was the threat? What commands were given? What did the person do? What did officers reasonably perceive? What does the video show? What do witnesses say? What do body cams show? What does the timeline look like? That's not bootlicking. That's not cop worship. That's called being a functional adult. But the left can't do that because their worldview requires an eternal villain. And if the facts don't cooperate, they'll just adjust the worldview. They attack the facts. Now here's the point they don't want you to say out loud. The Kyle Rittenhouse situation became a courtroom case with evidence tested under oath. This new case is still being fought in a public square where people lie for sport and certainty is purchased with retweets. So when they say these are the same, what they're really saying is, I don't care what is true, I care what is useful. That's not justice, that's propaganda. Now let's address the really stupid part of the comparison, the part where they act like context doesn't matter. Context matters. If you walk into chaos, you are volunteering for chaos. If you walk into a riot, whether you're carrying a gun or carrying a sign, you are choosing a high-risk environment. And here's the part that will offend the tender little souls. High-risk environments have high-risk outcomes. You don't get to treat riots like a theme park and then act stunned when things go sideways. But the left does this childish two-step every time. Step 1, this is a righteous uprising. Step 2, how dare consequences exist? It's like watching someone juggle chainsaws and then blame gravity for being problematic. Now, I'm going to say something that might cause an outbreak of performative fainting. If someone carries a firearm into a volatile situation and makes choices that escalate contact with armed authorities, there is a predictable range of outcomes. That doesn't automatically justify any shooting, but it does obliterate the left's favorite fairy tale that every tragedy has one innocent angel and one cartoon villain. Real life is usually messier, which is exactly why we have investigations, evidence, and trials, not hashtags. And that's what makes the Rittenhouse comparison such a cheap trick. With Kyle, they had facts, so they tried to destroy the process. With this new incident, they don't have facts, so they're trying to skip the process. In both cases, the objective is the same: control the story, control the outrage, control the narrative, because the left doesn't want your brain, they want your reaction. Now let's talk about the moral equivalence disease. This is a sickness where every event must be forced into the same template. Right wing equals bad, left wing equals victim, authorities equals evil, self-defense equals racism, borders equal fascism, consequences equal oppression. It's a paint-by-numbers ideology for people who treat thinking like unpaid labor. And that's why they keep trying to tie everything back to Rittenhouse. Because Rittenhouse is their Exhibit A of the system is evil. The problem is the trial didn't give them the ending they wanted. So they just keep relitigating it in the comments section like a bitter ex texting at 2 a.m. Here's the truth. The left doesn't actually want fairness. If they wanted fairness, they'd apply the same standards to everyone. They'd say, let's see the evidence. They'd say, let's wait for the facts. They'd say, let's acknowledge uncertainty. But they don't do that because fairness is an obstacle to power. Fairness means you might have to admit sometimes people claiming to be peaceful are not peaceful. Sometimes protesters are actually aggressors. Sometimes community defense is just a euphemism for intimidation. Sometimes a person who survives a confrontation isn't the villain. Sometimes the villain is the mob that thinks it can attack whoever it wants. And sometimes, yes, law enforcement makes mistakes, and the way you determine that is evidence, not hysteria. Now let's land this plane. If you want to argue policy, border policy, policing standards, use of force training, body cams, federal jurisdiction, great. Do it like an adult. But if you want to do the lazy activist thing, smash two events together and demand identical moral conclusions, you're not making an argument, you're performing. And nobody should structure their worldview around your performance art. So the next time someone says, Rittenhouse is just like this Border Patrol shooting, here's the proper response. No. One is a completed legal case with a verdict. The other is a developing incident where facts are still being sorted. If you can't tell the difference between those two, your political opinions are just emotional cosplay. And that's the moral equivalence meltdown. It is Monday, January 26th at 9:49 a.m., and you're listening to Shawn Thinking Out Loud. Today's episode is called The Gestapo Fantasy and the Courage of the Camera. Let's start with the modern American miracle. A certain class of people can look you dead in the face and say, "This is literally Hitler." And then, without even a hint of irony, walk right up to the so-called Hitler apparatus, shove a phone 6 inches from an agent's nose, spit out insults, and act like the worst thing that can happen is they get ratioed. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not bravery, that is a confession. Because if you genuinely believed you were living under the next Hitler, You would not be performing moral karaoke on a sidewalk. You would be hiding. You would be whispering. You would be praying nobody noticed you. Instead, what we get is this. The loony left calls ICE and Border Patrol the Gestapo and then behaves as if they're dealing with a suburban HOA. They heckle, they crowd, they posture, they poke, they provoke. They do everything short of pulling a consent form out of their tote bag and asking the officer to sign it in blue ink. So here's the first lesson for the adults in the room. If your behavior says, I expect due process, then your mouth doesn't get to say dictatorship. That's not how words work. That's not how history works. That's not how reality works. Now, I can already hear the sputtering. But Shawn, they're afraid. No, they're not. They are performing fear. They are costuming fear. They are using fear the way a bad actor uses a prop so they can justify whatever comes next. Because if you can slap the Gestapo label on someone, then suddenly any behavior becomes resistance. Even behavior that is reckless. Even behavior that is stupid. Even behavior that gets people hurt. And here's the sneaky part. They don't actually want the label because it's accurate. They want the label because it's useful. It turns their impulse control problem into a moral crusade. It turns a tantrum into a TED Talk, and it turns I don't like this policy into I am fighting evil itself. That's not politics, that's a child's fantasy. And just to make sure we're crystal clear, because subtlety is wasted on the comment section, let's describe what an actual secret police state looks like. In a real dictatorship, you don't get to get in their face and walk away. In a real dictatorship, the state does not stand there politely while you lecture it. In a real dictatorship, you don't get a content moment, you get consequences. Quiet ones. Fast ones. The kind that don't trend because you're not around to post them. So when someone says, this is the Gestapo, and then proceeds to behave like they're shopping for outrage at a farmer's market, I conclude one of two things. Either they do not believe what they're saying, or they are so historically illiterate that they think Gestapo means people I disagree with who are still constrained by law, oversight, and cameras. And if it's the second one, congratulations, you have weaponized your ignorance and called it virtue. That's basically the whole brand. Reality check number 1. If you can scream at law enforcement, mock them, surround them, try to bait them into a reaction, and then go home and post it, you are not living under the system you claim you're living under. You are living under a system that is restrained enough to tolerate your theater, which, hilariously, is the very restraint you deny exists. Reality check number 2. When you label your opponents Nazis, you're not describing them, you're giving yourself permission. Permission to dehumanize, permission to escalate, permission to treat ordinary policy disputes as holy war. And holy war has no rules, right? That's the psychological trick. It's a narrative designed to justify behavior that you would otherwise recognize as unacceptable. Reality check number 3. These people love calling themselves the resistance, which is adorable because the resistance historically involved, among other things, extreme risk, secrecy, and consequences. Today's resistance involves a ring light, a Venmo link, a sob story, and a mutual aid spreadsheet. Now let me say something that will cause immediate distress in the emotionally delicate. It is possible to oppose immigration policy. It is possible to criticize enforcement priorities. It is possible to argue about borders, visas, asylum, deportations, all of it. That's what a functioning society does. But the moment you stop arguing policy and start screaming Hitler, you are not persuading, you are casting a spell. You are trying to bypass reason and go straight to hysteria. And then when hysteria produces chaos, when people rush agents, block vehicles, throw themselves into confrontations, they act shocked that reality doesn't negotiate with their feelings. You know what's missing from the everyone is Hitler crowd? Accountability. Because accountability ruins the costume party. Accountability says you chose escalation. Accountability says you treated a serious situation like a performance. Accountability says You don't get to light the match and then blame oxygen for the fire. And here's the part that really irritates them. You don't get to call someone the Gestapo and then demand they treat you like a customer service representative. You don't get to declare this is war and then insist the other side follow the etiquette rules of a graduate seminar. So what are we actually looking at? We're looking at a movement that survives on moral drama. They need villains because villains make them heroes. They need apocalypse language because apocalypse language excuses bad judgment. They need fascism because I disagree doesn't generate donations. And if you're wondering why they can't stop even when it makes them look ridiculous, it's because the narrative is also a shield. It protects them from a very simple, very humiliating possibility, that they might be wrong, or worse, that they might be ordinary. Because if you admit it's not Hitler, then you might have to do the hard work of persuasion. You might have to make an argument. You might have to tolerate disagreement. You might have to accept election outcomes. You might have to grow up. And growing up is not their strong suit. The loony left is a strange habit. They pick a fight, they stage a confrontation, they push right up to the edge, and then when something goes sideways, they act like the universe violated their terms of service. How dare consequences happen to me? This is the worldview of someone who believes that moral certainty is a force field. It's not. It never has been. Here's a simple rule that will improve your life overnight. If you're going to approach armed professionals in a high-tension environment, do it with basic survival instinct, not swagger, not rage, not performative heroism, instinct, distance, clarity, and an understanding that you are not the main character in the universe. Because the internet has convinced too many people that being mad is the same as being right. And it's not. Being mad is just being mad. Now, since we're talking about dictatorship, let's do one more history lesson. In real authoritarian systems, propaganda works by making the public feel small, powerless, watched, afraid. In our current circus, the propaganda works by making certain people feel heroic, righteous, untouchable, entitled to escalate. That is not the psychology of the oppressed. That is the psychology of the spoiled. And if that makes you angry, good. Anger is at least a sign you're still capable of feeling something other than self-congratulations. So here's my thesis in one sentence for anyone taking notes. They don't call it the Gestapo because they believe it. They call it the Gestapo because they want to behave badly and still feel holy. And here's the corollary. If you need to invent a dictatorship to justify your conduct in a democracy, the problem is not the regime. The problem is you. Now, I'm not asking for sainthood. I'm asking for intellectual hygiene. Use words like they mean something. If you want to say, I think this policy is unjust, say that. If you want to say, I think this enforcement is mismanaged, say that. If you want to say, I don't like the outcome of elections, at least be honest enough to say that. But stop dragging history's graves into your tantrum because you lack the discipline to argue like an adult. Because every time you scream Nazi at a bureaucracy, you can still sue, protest, film, and mock. You are not proving you're a freedom fighter. You're proving you don't know what freedom is. And if you want a name for today's lesson, it's this. They're not afraid of tyranny. They're afraid of reality. That's it for the reality check with receipts. If you enjoyed this episode of Shawn Thinking Out Loud, remember, the loudest moralists are usually auditioning for a role they haven't earned. Until next time, keep your words sharp, your facts sharper, and your drama in check. If your political worldview collapses the moment law is enforced evenly, your problem isn't tyranny, it's reality. All right, now I want your questions this week. Drop them in the comments, send them in, give me your best shot. History, law, politics, or whatever nonsense you saw online that needs to be dissected with a sharp object and basic literacy. This is Shawn Thinking Out Loud. I'm the super gringo. Links in the description, QR codes on the screen, same camera, same honesty, no babysitting.
Every time I tried to stand